Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we're diving straight into something absolutely massive today. We are going to systematically unpack one of the most monumental, truly fascinating paradigm shifts in the entire history of science, Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. This theory was so groundbreaking, the man literally waited over 20 years to publish it. So if you've ever found yourself wondering about the actual nuts and bolts mechanics of how life on Earth evolves, adapts, and diversifies over vast stretches of time, you are in the right place. We're going to break down the core engine of evolution, look at the historical context, and explore some mind-blowing, observable examples of this theory in action today. Okay, let's dive into our roadmap. First, we'll look at before Darwin and acquired variations. Second, the voyage and the finches. Third, the struggle for existence. Fourth, survival of the fittest, and finally, the origin of species. Section 1, Before Darwin and Acquired Variations. So to really understand Darwin, we kind of have to rewind a bit and see what people thought before him. Enter a French naturalist named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. He had this idea called the theory of acquired characteristics. Basically, he suggested that organisms literally change their own bodies through use or disuse over their lifetime, and then here's the kicker, they pass those newly acquired traits down to their kids. The absolute classic textbook example of Lamarck's hypothesis, the giraffe. Under his model, early giraffes actively stretched their necks trying to reach high leaves. Over a lifetime of all that stretching, their necks supposedly got a tiny bit longer, and they just passed those artificially stretched necks to the next generation. It was a valiant, totally logical guess for the time, but actually completely wrong. Darwin essentially flipped Lamarck's whole idea upside down. Lamarck thought organisms actively change themselves. Darwin, on the other hand, proposed that the environment acts as a filter on genetic variations that already exist. So, in Darwin's view, those giraffes didn't stretch their necks and pass that stretch along. No, instead, giraffes that just happened to be born with naturally longer necks, a random genetic variation, simply survived the dry spells better because they could reach higher food. They didn't acquire the trait, they inherited it, they survived, and they passed that winning genetic lottery ticket down to their offspring. Moving on to Section 2, the voyage and the finches. Picture Darwin on his famous voyage on the HMS Beagle, spending crucial time observing wildlife on the Galapagos Islands. And he hits this core mystery, which I want to pose to you right now. How exactly did one ancestral seed-eating bird show up on these islands and eventually branch out into completely diverse species of finches? Think about that for a second. What forces could possibly drive a single, uniform population to splinter into entirely different forms? What he figured out is totally fascinating. He noticed that the distinct environmental demands of each specific island dictated exactly which beak variations gave a bird a survival advantage. It all came down to the local menu. Some islands had incredibly tough seeds, others had cacti, and some were just crawling with insects. Over time, the finches with beak shapes that randomly happened to be best suited for their specific local food, like say a heavy thick beak for crushing seeds or a long narrow one for probing cacti, those were the birds that ate well, survived, and reproduced. The environment was literally molding the population. Which brings us to Section 3, the struggle for existence. Now things get a little brutal here, because the actual engine for evolutionary change is intensely competitive. It all starts with a very simple biological condition known as overproduction. This happens when organisms produce significantly more offspring than the local environment and its limited resources can possibly support. It's just basic math, really. If you've got 100 seeds and 1,000 hungry birds, well, 900 birds are going to starve. This natural overproduction inevitably triggers a massive daily competition for limited food, space, and creates this desperate struggle to outrun predators. Because of that struggle, the environment acts as a totally unforgiving filter, putting intense pressure on these populations. The environment doesn't care who tries the hardest, right? It's the ultimate impartial judge. If an organism is even slightly too slow or its beak is slightly too weak, it gets filtered out. This constant, unyielding pressure is what separates the weak from those who are biologically equipped to survive the struggle. All right, Section 4, Survival of the Fittest. Whenever you think about natural selection, I want you to picture 4 fundamental pillars. Step 1 is variation. No two individuals are exactly alike. These unique physical and behavioral differences just exist naturally. Step 2 is inheritance. A lot of these distinct variations are genetic, meaning they can be passed down. Step 3 is overproduction, which we just talked about. Too many offspring, not enough resources. And finally, step 4 is differential survival. Offspring that happen to have advantageous traits compete better, and they survive to reproduce. So the crucial point here is that when you mix inherited variation with the struggle for existence, boom, you get survival of the fittest. The advantageous traits win the day. To really lock this in, let's look at a classic, observable example that proves this isn't just ancient history. Think about the peppered moth in England. Back in the 19th century, before the Industrial Revolution, light-colored moths were the norm. Why? Because they blended perfectly into unpolluted, light-barked trees. But then, the Industrial Revolution hits, pumping tons of soot into the air and literally darkening the tree trunks. Suddenly, those light moths stood out like a sore thumb and were easily eaten by birds. Meanwhile, the rare dark-colored variants, which used to be the easy targets, were now perfectly camouflaged. By the early 1900s, the population had rapidly adapted, evolving to be almost completely black. The environment changed, the filter shifted, and survival of the fittest did the rest. And what's wild is that this brilliantly illustrates natural selection happening right now, today, especially in modern medicine. Look at antibiotic resistance. Bacteria mutate really rapidly. When we hit a bacterial infection with antibiotics, the medicine wipes out all the susceptible, weak variants. But if a random genetic mutation makes just a handful of those bacteria resistant to our drugs, they survive. With all their competition wiped out, those resistant strains rapidly multiply. Before you know it, the entire population shifts toward total resistance. In this case, our own medicine is literally acting as the environmental filter, selecting for the strongest, most dangerous bacteria. Finally, Section 5. The origin of species. So, all of these incredible observations, from the finches to the brutal mechanics of overproduction and inheritance, it all clicked together in 1859. That's when Charles Darwin finally published this massive scientific paradigm shift on the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Honestly, that incredibly long title acts as a perfect summary of the entire theory we've just unpacked. And we definitely have to give a quick shout out to Alfred Russel Wallace here, a fellow scientist who made very similar observations, providing the crucial backup evidence that helped Darwin finally unveil this whole concept to the world. So, to wrap this all up in a neat bow, here is our definitive summary. Natural selection is the process by which organisms change over time because individuals with traits better suited to their environment survive, reproduce, and pass those favorable genes on. It is an elegant, entirely relentless mechanism. It explains exactly how global populations adapt, diversify, and slowly evolved into completely new species over vast stretches of geological time. Which leaves us with a pretty intense final thought. As we just saw, natural selection is absolutely not stuck in the past. It is actively driving things like bacteria to rapidly mutate and resist our modern medicine right under our noses. We are literally part of this biological filter. So the big question is, how will humanity adapt to survive our own ongoing struggle for existence? Keep that in the back of your mind next time you look at the natural world around you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this explainer. I really hope this breakdown brought Darwin's incredible theory to life for you. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.